Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Elkwitz. I'm the president of the Long Island Housing Partnership. I guess I'm moderating because I've been there for 30 years and working on affordable housing. My other colleague here, James Britz in the back, who's our executive vice president, is here today as well, and he's been there for about 20 years now. So we hope to bring our experience with this esteemed panel here today to talk about affordable housing. And one of the questions I'm going to ask everyone when they're done speaking today, we're going to wrap up by answering a question of what one thing do you think we could do, or you'd like to see done, or you think it needs to be done, that would create more affordable housing here on Long Island. So we're going to hold that question to the end. But right now we're going to start off with a video. It has some of our panelists in the video, and I think it's a good oversight of what goes on when we propose an affordable housing development. So maybe we can dim the lights.
Affordable housing and the need for a diverse housing stock have been a topic of many discussions on Long Island. Long Island's housing needs are not what they were 50 years ago. The model of a community composed entirely of single-family homes is being challenged by many, such as young people that are just entering the workforce and empty nesters who either want a different lifestyle or cannot afford a home of their own. But this shift has not been without its tensions and debate. Two Huntington projects, the 379-unit Avalon Bay rental community on 5th Street in Huntington Station, and the 117-unit Highland Green Limited Equity Cooperative in Melville, shine a lens on the many facets of the affordable housing debate in Huntington. The needs, the solutions, and the reasons behind the controversy.
This piece of property was originally zoned for single-family homes. Honestly, it was really a conversation that I had with Supervisor Petrone years ago when we were first looking at this site, and his desire to do something different than the traditional single-family home development, which is appropriate in many circumstances, but does not provide the diversity of housing choices that we were trying to accomplish, and that the supervisor thought that the town needed to really provide those housing choices for all the residents of the town of Huntington.
Because you were a part of the Avalon approval as an advocate for an affordable housing component on that, because as we know, the majority of the units at Avalon are market rate rental housing. But what was that process like, and what do you recall?
It was 2 years of intense conflict, and it came out of, I think, an understandable fear from some of the residents of Huntington Station, which for many, many years had been the area where most of the affordable housing was built. As we went through the process, we tried to keep their concerns in mind, and we even refigured our own messaging and realized that this was not just about housing. This was an economic development issue. So that when you talk about Avalon Bay, as we did, we shifted our own messaging from we need affordable housing to we need the economic revitalization of Huntington Station.
The great thing about working for a company like we do is we have actual school children data, and we're able to provide that to the school districts as we go through this process. And we did the same thing here. And many had projections of up to 500 school children coming out of this development. And at the end of the day, from year to year, our school children impact is anywhere from 40 to 70 kids.
It didn't create the amount of problems for the school district as we had expected, which is good. I think much like the Avalon in Melville, it probably has a lot of non-custodial single parents. So we didn't get nearly as many kids as we thought we would.
So Rulon Road, speak to that process. You said 15 years, which we all recognize at that press conference that I recall. What was that process like?
Pretty much the same. Local fears that the wrong kind of people are going to come in, the wrong kind of architecture is going to stare us in the face every morning when we get up. It's going to add to the children in the Dix Hill School District. It's going to add to traffic. But in the end, I remember that last meeting in this room, just so many people getting up and saying, whoa, kind of what you said. What is this all about? We've seen the plans, we've looked at the building, we've seen what's happened with Avalon, very few kids. Now, why are we so nervous about Ruland? It's going to be the same deal. And sure enough, it was.
And I think what finally was the tipping point on Ruland Road, and to former Supervisor Petrone's credit, was his concept of a co-op with a small type of ownership component to it. Because that's always, I think, what we hear a lot of is, renters are not invested in the community. They don't care as much as owners. I don't necessarily buy that, but it was a way to bridge the gap and an olive branch that I think the supervisor employed there.
The residents can get entry into the project without putting large amounts of money down where they are shareholders in a cooperative corporation. Well, the concern was that we were going to be overrun, that we had 117 units, and that there were going to be hundreds of children here. And the reality was that right now, our records indicate we have about 29 children that are attending local schools.
It really, at the end of the day, is more for your child. You want to put them in a place that is secure, they can go to school, and the only resources are available for them. So this is definitely a spectacular opportunity for me.
Can you speak to the need for a diversity of housing stock, both in the town and in the region?
We have a younger population now, very often burdened with college debt, marrying later, having children later, who really aren't quite ready for the single-family model, the 90%. You also have a growing senior population that wants to stay on Long Island, but don't want to stay in single-family homes. The other problem we have, and it's a very serious one, is that our housing stock is so expensive that you have it more and more unaffordable. So we are losing folks. So we have to rethink the model. The 90% has been great. Raising kids, a single-family home is great, but it's not for everybody, and I think we need to recognize that.
What are the challenges that you've seen to workforce or affordable housing, whatever you call it, the one that's going to fill that niche where people can't make it into a market house and affordable units are there and getting approved?
I think the main barrier we have is that fear that we're going to have these high-rise, low-income housing complexes that will flood us with kids, raise our taxes, bring all kinds of traffic, and turn us into this sort of crowded, semi-slum New York City outlying region. None of that is true.
What are the type of numbers that you've seen in the lottery system? What is the need and how is it reflected in that lottery?
Yeah, I think the lottery system is a good indicator of what the demand really is for these affordable homes. When you have a lottery, we literally have hundreds of people apply to be the winner of that lottery to get an affordable home. We recently did one for one house, and there was 400 people. There were 400 people applying for that house. But it really gives you a feel for the number of people that really need an affordable home.
Because there's such a big demand for this type of housing and for the affordability levels that exist here, there was a lottery system that was set up, and it was done in conjunction with the town of Huntington, with the Long Island Housing Partnership, and the New York State Homes and Community Renewal, which is the housing agency that was involved in assisting in funding for this project. There were over 700 applications that we received for 117 units. So it was a very significant number of folks that were interested in getting occupancy here.
I remember the first year that I did this, around 2000 or thereabouts. I remember Councilman Israel, who would become our congressman, saying, "Where are the supporters of affordable housing?" I think in these years, through public education, through organizing, through recognizing the need, through good media, through good policies, through good creation of good-looking housing like Avalon Bay, we've shifted. And so it's a little easier now than it was in the beginning when I got involved, but we still have work to do because 70% of Long Islanders recognize the need for affordable housing. And I'm thinking as an advocate, whoa, that's good. But 60% said, not in my neighborhood. So that's the moment of truth. When you come into Dix Hills, where I live, and you say, listen, we have this idea, those prejudices, those fears, those stereotypes are still going to rise up to the surface. But it's not really as wild as it had been 20 years ago. We've made progress, but we have work to do.
This cannot be a one community issue. When you put too many low-income people in one community, such as Huntington Station, that has been done over the last 40 or 50 years, especially with the urban renewal, you create a whole set of problems that are unintended.
I'm not a big over fan of government intrusion in markets, but this is one where really the government is almost the only answer. There's a limited amount of land, there's strong demand, there's a lot of news right now about how market rate houses get snapped up in a day. There's a lot of demand even for market rate housing. So the prices of the land, the prices of the houses are only going to go up. And the only way we're going to be able to create or preserve affordable housing is if the government takes a role in it.
There is such a demand for market rate housing that no developer in the world who's acting in his self-interest, which he should, and who's driven by a profit motive and maybe investors, is ever going to fill that need unless it's really an act of charity, which you don't see a lot of that.
Well, businesses aren't in the business of giving their money away, so they have to be able to at least break even, and that requires some kind of intervention. There are certainly things that don't involve money that could be done. Improving and streamlining the process is one. The work that we do, reducing the amount of opposition in the community. Every year that a project drags on when somebody's trying to build an affordable unit, costs them more money. That has to be factored into the money that they have to recover. So the less opposition there is, the more smoothly things will run. And that's one of the things that we do at the Housing Coalition, is try to get the word out there that these things are needed, that they can look nice, that they are not a detriment to the community, and that we should be encouraging them rather than trying to discourage them.
So that pretty much gives us an overview of what we're going to talk about today. And the Long Island Housing Partnership has built thousands of homes over the year. We have hundreds that we monitor for rentals, and we have hundreds that we're working on that will be under construction in the next couple of years. But with that said, we have a great panel here. We have the Honorable Tracy Edwards, who now is working as a not-for-profit developer with Habitat. We have Dr. Dick Kubak, Richard Kubak, who, as you saw on the will be very instrumental in grassroots work, especially in Huntington Station. We'll get more into it. I'd like them to explain a little bit about what they do now. We have Peter Flory, who's a private developer who built the Highland Greens development, the first limited equity co-op development, I would say, on Long Island. And I got to give him a lot of credit for doing that, because it took a lot of time. We were involved working with him on it. And then we will get into, we have the realtor, Jim Spear, who's here. He's going to talk about the roles of realtors and how they can help create more affordable housing, aware about, know about. We have a lot of times when we put a development out, we want to make sure it gets out to everyone so they hear about it. So how realtors are working with creating the knowledge out there that there's affordable housing developments that are available. As you saw, the numbers in the lottery are extreme. When sometimes we do a home and we have 200, 300, 400, 500 names entered for one unit. So there is a demand for it. Dave Gallo, who's a private developer as well, he works on a lot of tax credit developments, similar to Peter Flory, also works on tax credits. So we're going to get his input. And then we have Michael here, Michael Rooney, who actually interesting in the fact that you built both on Long Island and in New York. So I'll be looking for your information on how the differences are building off the island versus on Long Island. So I'm sorry, Ian, I didn't see you. Ian's very interesting because what they were talking about community and community opposition, a lot of it's caused because discrimination. People are afraid of those people, and we're not sure who those people are because they're us, all right? But the bottom line is Ian's going to wrap up a little bit and talk about what he sees that are still the outstanding issues as it relates to fair housing. So I think we have a real broad-based panel here. I'm sorry about that, Ian. I know you've been traveling, so you're back on Long Island. But the bottom line is we have a real broad-based group of people here. So I'm going to start off with the Honorable Tracy Edwards. And the question that I have for you is, you sat on the side as a town council woman in Huntington. I'm sure you didn't turn away any affordable housing developments, but I'm sure some of the colleagues that maybe you sat on the town council with had different opinions of why it should or shouldn't have been built. So you are now in a role at Habitat for Humanity. Congratulations. I know it's a new venture for you. We welcome you in the field because we have so much need that we have to build so many more homes. But the bottom line is, how do you see working with your colleagues on the town board and convincing them that this is a much needed development, affordable housing? It really impacts our economic climate in that community as well. How do you see that now helping you in working for Habitat? And maybe you could just start off by explaining a little bit about Habitat's role and how they actually develop affordable housing.
Sure. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. So I have been fortunate enough to have worn a bunch of hats around this topic. Because before I became a elected official, I was the chair of the planning board. Can't hear me? I'm pretty loud. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. I work for Verizon too, so can you hear me now? It's stuck in my brain for 37 years. So, I've had the great opportunity to be on all sides of this issue, right? As an elected official of the planning board chair, I was on a school board for 10 years. So what I believe that I bring to the Habitat space is being able to be an advocate, but also understand all sides of this particular issue. And I think that what I believe that elected officials really need to do, and what we can do to help them, is to talk about this topic before the applications come in. Because when the applications come in, then all of a sudden you have Mr. Flory becomes the boogeyman, right? They're looking up who he is, where he lives, why is he doing this, all that type of stuff. Then you look at not only the developer, but then what's the community. I happen to be those people that people are afraid of. So I think that the more that we can talk and work on affordable housing before the project comes in, rezone the areas when it's needed, work on the legislation in terms of putting it in, that will help everyone. It'll help the community because it diffuses the issue. It'll help, I believe, the developers and the realtors, because then when they come in to talk about planning for a project, the areas have already been identified, the community input has already taken place, and the school board has already been involved. Then you can talk about the different projects, but if you start at the need for housing and get personal and talk about how you don't want your children to leave Long Island, but you don't want them to live with you, then it becomes a completely different conversation. Okay?
Don't sit down yet, because I
Okay.
got one other important question for you, but maybe you want to define or spend a moment defining community, because when we go into new development, we make sure the community is included. How important of a role is that when you're building anything?
Yeah, it's critical, and when I say community, I'm talking about school district, I'm talking about neighborhood. A lot of the opposition that you get from the community happens to be people who don't even live anywhere near where the development project is going to be. So if you work hard to identify the area surrounding where the development is going to be, that to me defines community. However, to talk about it ahead of time, it should be regionally. You should have as many advocates as you can talking about how important it is and looking at it from an economic standpoint, about how important it is that, you know, when you have, I did an affordable housing legislation. It was 20% of the median family income. But guess what? You're still paying $3,000. And our kids can't leave our house and pay $3,000 a month for rent. It's just not doable. But if you talk about it regionally offline, get all of the stakeholders and have real honest conversations about housing, that will help, I believe, when the projects come in.
Thank you. Dr. Kubak, we go back a long time. You were always involved in grassroots organization, supporting affordable housing, et cetera. You made our life easier at the partnership by clearing the path so that we can actually focus on the construction of it and getting it completed. First of all, you're on the Suffolk County Welfare to Work Commission. You're the chairperson of that. I know they did a study looking at, in Suffolk County, looking at the housing and the affordable housing needs, and I know they did a report. So maybe you want to comment a little bit on that, and again, taking off what we just spoke to Tracy about, maybe you could go into a little bit more from your standpoint of the grassroots organization and getting people out and how important that is for the elected officials.
Sure. Can you hear me? Now? Yeah. Do any of this? I don't think this is working anyway. So I chair the Welfare to Work Commission of the Suffolk County Legislature. That's one hat I'm wearing today. The other hat is I'm vice president of the Huntington Township Housing Coalition. You saw me in the film. And our president is here, Roger Weeding, in the back. So I may share some of this with him. On now? Oh, there we go. Okay. Let me start with the Welfare to Work Commission. So we report to the legislature in Suffolk County on issues related to people who are on public assistance, leaving public assistance for work, or who are poor and might have to turn to the government for supportive services. And obviously one of the significant problems that any of those folks have, not to mention many more Long Islanders, is the lack of affordable housing. So 10 years ago, 2007, we did a report, held public hearings, and we did a report on the lack of affordable housing for working people. And then in 2017, the 10th anniversary of that, we said, well, maybe we ought to revisit it. And if you want a challenge, we decided we would take one piece of the original report and look at the housing available for people with mental illness. And that led to us peeling away and looking at the problem of homelessness and how many of the homeless are homeless because they're not getting mental health services that should have been community-based. It was like peeling an onion and peeling an onion. And then ultimately we had to revisit the original concern, which is that all of this attempt to find supportive housing for people with emotional and mental problems is within the context of the really awful lack of affordable housing for anybody earning, frankly, under $80,000 a year. You could even say under $120,000 a year. So we released the report, and we're hoping to get some governmental attention to the issue. Very, very complicated. But it really, and honestly, you know, I had hoped we would stay confined to the issue of supportive housing. And we realized you can't look at that slice of housing without looking at the larger issue of the lack of affordable housing. And that led us to the second part of your question, which is the community organizing piece. So as you heard me say in the video, things have changed. I'll give you two examples of change, and I hope you don't mind, but one of them is sitting next to me. So the day before Thanksgiving, the year you were first elected, we went to your house to talk about Rulin Road. Do you remember this? Oh, yeah, okay. So you weren't even in office yet. You were elected for about 2 weeks. And we were talking about Rulin Road, which is now called Highland Greens. And Tracy said, you know, I really would prefer that be ownership. As a person of color, ownership and being vested and getting equity is really, really important. And we were pitching rental housing and the importance of it, and she was listening. Listening so that 3 or 4, I forget the number of years later, but you sponsored a bill to require a set-aside for affordable rental housing in any commercial development that is going to create housing. So here's example one of the changes we've seen. The other example is I'm on the board of Vision Long Island, and I chided Eric because the first time he had a panel on affordable housing, it was after lunch. And there were more people here than in the audience. So look at the change. Things are changing, and I think people are really seeing the need. I think the challenge is frankly exactly what Tracy said. You've got to get into the community. You've got to let the community know through conversation that this is in their interests. I think one of the biggest stereotypes we're overcoming is the fear of renters. And I think people now recognize that the rental market is the hottest market on Long Island now, I think. But as Mark Cuthbertson said at one of the town board meetings, it's not affordable. So we need to, at the grassroots level, sort of dispel those stereotypes that we talked about in the film, and to help people to recognize that creating affordable housing is in their interests, as in getting their kids out of the basement, keeping their grandkids in a drivable distance from their home, those kinds of things. So what we've done in the coalition is started to reframe affordable housing from it's us trying to help them to this is really about us trying to help you. I think that's the major change we've made.
Thank you. Ian, I'm going to skip over you intentionally now, but I want to go into the private developers in a moment. But to give some insight, our rental market is about 20-21% of the housing stock right now. Normally, our surrounding communities are up near 30, surrounding states, New Jersey and Connecticut as well. And there was a projection by the Regional Plan Association that we need about 154,000 more rental units here on Long Island. With that said, feasibly, you may be able to get about 58,000 in the next 15 years. Will be feasibly built if you can get that, if you have the land and you get the approvals in place. And I use the word approvals very loosely because that's one of the biggest obstacles. But if you look at that, that would only bring our market up to around 25% of the housing stock being rental. So there is a tremendous need, and you're absolutely right when you talk about, and that is across the board. Rentals, it's not an unfavorable term anymore. People are starting to accept the need that we have rentals, and we need them to keep our economy strong here. When I first started years ago, 30 years ago, we asked the audience, does someone know of someone who moved off the island because they couldn't come back? And we saw about half the people would raise their hand, hesitant. We would say, oh, do you have any kids or that went to college and didn't come back? Do you have people that couldn't stay on Long Island because they couldn't afford it? And a few hands would go up. Now you ask that question, everyone knows of someone that they want to come back to Long Island and have to leave because they couldn't afford it. So there are changes. We're still working at it. We have a lot to do. But I'm going to skip over to Peter Flory because Peter Flory was the third person in that video just now. And I'm going to actually talk a little bit about Highland Greens, because Highland Greens, after the councilwoman talked about it being home ownership with your view and your vision, he created or worked on a very creative way to provide a limited equity co-op development here on Long Island. And let me tell you, it was not without problems. I got calls at 10 o'clock at night from the state asking me, what the hell are you doing? Is it a rental? Is it a home ownership unit? What is it? Could you explain it? You got 2 weeks to get it done, and then we had a 19-hour closing. And I think, Peter, we were sitting there, and we didn't even know that most of the people left, and they adjourned it to continue on Monday, right before Christmas. So we went home that night thinking that we'd be done, but we actually had to go back as well to finish the closing. So if you don't have any idea what it takes to put one of these deals through, Peter, maybe you could explain a little bit, because thinking out of the box also causes other people, or requires other people to think out of the box, and you have to educate on what you're thinking to make it fit in their needs. So you want to talk a little bit about the limited?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. And before I get into that, maybe I'll just give a really quick background on how Highland Green came about in the first place, which was that it was supposed to have been the affordable component to a much larger residential project that was developed back in the 1990s. That was called the Greens at Half Hollow Hills. Now, that was supposed to have been developed 15 years before we developed Highland Green. That project never went forward, and one of the reasons it never went forward was that it was approved as, it was supposed to be, it was a multifamily project, but limited to home ownership and one bedrooms. So same number of units, but that combination. And the developer that preceded us wasn't able to move that forward, and I don't think anybody else would have been able to move that forward. So when we took over, contracted to buy Highland Green, we knew that that was not going to be possible, and we started to explore ways with the town to see if we could get it developed. There was also at the time, and there's a lot of history to this, which I'm not going to get into, but at the time there was also a lawsuit that the NAACP had filed against the town, citing fair housing issues, and so the town was very interested in getting this resolved, getting the housing built. The question was, how could we get it done and make all sides happy? And the solution that we came up with was the limited equity co-op, which would provide home ownership in a cooperative model, but in a way that was not only affordable, and that was key, but accessible to just about anybody who would otherwise qualify for a rental unit. And just to break it down, the residents in a limited equity co-op are shareholders in cooperative corporations. So they are not renters anymore. They're paying monthly maintenance, but they are, their down payment that they would is equivalent to what they would otherwise pay in a rental situation, namely 1 month security. So the barrier to entry is the same as it would be in a rental situation, but now you have somebody who is an owner. So what distinguishes this from a rental, right? What distinguishes it is that there's no longer a landlord involved. There is the shareholders, the cooperative corporation, as is normally the case. They're the ones who determine how the project's going to work, and the financing, and any increase in the value and any amortization of the financing over time inures to the benefit of the cooperative corporation rather than a landlord. So over time, the ability to keep this affordable will get better and better as debt is retired on the project. So that was really the primary initiative and the benefit of going this route. We as developers didn't benefit because we're no longer the landlord. We handed that over to the residents. But we were happy to do it. There was a lot of brain damage involved. It was the first time that this kind of project was ever done with tax credits and a tax-exempt bond. It's never been done before, and we had to get all kinds of approvals from IRS, et cetera, in order to get this done. I'm not sure we'd ever do it again, but if we found ourselves, and I think more and more we will find ourselves in a situation where, look, let's be honest. We were building. This is in Melville. This is an affluent area of Long Island in the town of Huntington. We were across the street from a project of single-family homes that were selling at that time. This is 4 or 5 years ago for over $1 million. So this is an affluent area. There was a lot of concern, as I mentioned in the video, about schools. But if we're going to be successful in developing affordable housing on Long Island, we need to build in all areas of Long Island, not just in the traditional areas of Long Island where affordable housing has been built. And that was, to me, what was so important about getting this project built. And what we're finding now is that the areas where affordable housing was traditionally built are finally now saying, no more. That's it. We have enough. We should not, be the area that gets all of the affordable housing. And I completely agree with that. We need, Long Island, there's a big, in my humble opinion, there's a segregation problem on Long Island, and we need, Long Island needs to get beyond that. So, everybody needs access not only to housing, but also to good education. So that was very important to me. So what we're finding, just if I may very quickly, on what we're finding on developing affordable housing, is that there is a growing acceptance, to affordable housing, because everybody realizes it's needed. Nobody wanted it in their backyard, but people are recognizing now that you do need it. And so what we're finding is even in affluent areas, but what we're finding is that in downtown areas, we are finding a growing acceptance to affordable housing, and that's big. So we've done a project near the Valley Stream train station. We're doing a project near the Bellport train station now, near the Bayshore train station. These projects are now happening. We just got a zoning approval in Bellport last week. We had 16 people speak at the zoning hearing. All spoke in favor of the project, not one person in opposition. Now that's not to say that we didn't have opposition when we started the process, but this is what Tracy was talking about, is getting out into the community early on and educating folks about what this is really going to be. And after months of talking with folks, going door to door, we got everybody behind the project. We explained to them what this was going to be. We actually brought them down to Highland Green to show them what this was going to look like. So the good news is we're seeing a change, a dramatic change in terms of the growing acceptance of affordable housing on Long Island. One big challenge that we face in getting affordable housing built is the availability of pilots, of payments, and that's a whole other topic. But I'll hand it back to Peter at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And Peter builds both home ownership and mostly rentals as well through tax credits. I'm going to, Jim, skip over you for a second and go to Dave. I'm going to talk about the developers. Dave builds or is a professional in the tax credit development field, and I'd like for him to explain a little bit about what tax credits are and then talk a little bit about some of your developments. But some of the home ownership that Peter mentioned, the limited equity co-op, there are different models of what we call shared equity ownership, and that's what they call the affordable home ownership. So it could be, in the past, you've seen where affordable homes were deed restricted or had covenants and restrictions placed on them. A limited equity co-op is another model, and a community land trust is the third model, or some combination of those. So, I think we tried them all around, and I know how, Paul, you're shaking your head because you're involved with us. We both have land trust now, the land trust model, and I think we tried all. We worked with Peter on the limited equity co-op, we worked on the deed restricted for many years, but there's reasons and purposes for each one of these models, and they're critical to create the affordable homeownership options that are out there. So with that said, I'm going to turn back to the rental options, and Dave, maybe you can talk a little bit about tax credits.
Sure. Good afternoon. Leave it to me to get it a little bit wrong. I actually have a slideshow here, but it does answer a little bit of what tax credits are. And I want to pick up on where Peter left off about delivering affordable housing in communities that have otherwise been limited to acceptance. And Katie Casey is here with the East Hampton Housing Authority. Katie and I are working together on a 38-unit affordable housing, family development, large bedroom sizes, and something that we are really excited about, working with the East Hampton Housing Authority. When we, and George was brought in a little bit later, but when we did start working on it together, Katie had done an amazing job of getting community support, had over 20 residents show up to the town board and planning board hearings, and really did influence the town to accept the project because their community was speaking out in support of the project. And I think that night not one person spoke out against the project, and we are really excited to be working on affordable housing in East Hampton. So Georgica is a full-service development company focused on affordable housing. We work a lot with housing authorities, but we also work on projects that don't involve housing authorities but other not-for-profits. This was a project that we did work on with the North Hempstead Housing Authority. We were selected as their co-developer. Pondview Homes, which was a gut rehabilitation of, it was 55 units in Manhasset. It was a former New York State public housing project. Here's a before picture. Here's an after picture. What you'll see is, hardy siding, hard surface countertops. You can't see that because that's on the inside. Maybe it's on the next slide. No. Okay. But anyway, we do use material that is otherwise used in market rate housing. Some would even say luxury housing, something that we're very proud of. We want to deliver high quality and standard. This particular project was out in Southampton, so we were the first to get affordable housing approved in Southampton on 2 separate projects. This was a shot from earlier this year. This sits right on the Spionk train line, so it was a TOD site. The site had abandoned buildings from the Long Island Railroad that goes back 50 or 60 years. We were able to purchase the site, walk it through the zoning process, talking about community support and the neighbor outreach. Just today, I pretty much have gotten to know every neighbor in the vicinity. They originally were opposed to the project, but through visiting other properties and learning the eligibility of the residents and walking through the process, and I've walked into people's homes with the cabinets that were going to have been selected and the countertops to give them a comfort level that, this is the quality that's going to be next to your house. Just today, the neighbor reached out to me as I was walking the site and said, it looks like the dumpster, the pad for the dumpster, it's going to be really close to my property line. Is there any way that you would move it? And the answer was, yeah, of course. But we had that relationship where he could bring that up. We're going to move it, to another area, not far, but at least it won't be right where right where his backyard is, right where he was, having his family barbecues. This is a list of, we started Georgica in 2012, so we were fortunate enough to get our first 9% award of tax credits in the following year. Over the last, however many years, we've worked on 1,000 units and close to, $500 million in total development costs. This was a historic adaptive reuse up in Watertown. I'm not going to kind of spend too much time on these, just to move things along. That's Pondview. That's Brooklyn. This is a supportive housing project that the building on the right is currently built. And the building on the left we closed about a month ago. The building on the right will have 83 units set aside for formerly homeless veterans. The building on the left has a set aside of about 80 units for domestic violence victims. This particular project is in Freeport. Superstorm Sandy had really damaged the federal public housing project across the street. We purchased the site next door, we rezoned it, worked with the village, and then all of the residents will move from their existing public housing project to this building. Here's a project in downtown Riverhead. Worked with Jonathan on it when he was at HCR, and Jonathan was an awesome project manager working with Georgica Green and working through all the issues that we had encountered. He asked me how the project was going when I walked in, and I said, well, we've had 2 major cost impacts. One of them was we had estimated piles going down roughly 85 feet. They're upwards of 100, and we are dewatering more than we anticipated. Those are the risks that we take. This particular, that's one of the pictures of the Southampton project. The town was very involved and the planners were very involved in designing it so that it would look like it would always fit in with the community. So this particular building was supposed to represent the manor house. This is the project next to the Spion train station, so there was retail involved there. I'm going to kind of skip that. All right, so here is ultimately the question that I was posed with respect to tax credits. Okay, so here we go. You know, most people well, tax credits were created in 1986 out of the Tax Reform Act, right? So it was a way of creating affordable housing and placing a lot of the risk burden away from HUD, but onto private and not-for-profit developers utilizing tax credits. In working in Southampton, one of the local community groups said to me, I think it was the East End, something, said like, we hear about these tax credits, we feel like you're whipping them up in your basement, and it's never going to really be affordable, and really what's the story? And when you kind of show them that it's based upon Section 42 of the IRS Code, there's an entire interpretation of what you are and not allowed to do, and it limits rents up to 60% of the area median income, and there's other standards that often, or that have to be met in order to qualify. So in order to access these tax credits, they are or provided by the State Housing Finance Agency. Every state has one. The state has sort of the playbook for allowing developers to understand how they're going to allocate these very competitive tax credits. It's called the Qualified Allocation Plan. So anyone could go to any state and see how these tax credits are given out. Once, by the way, happy to give this slideshow to anyone that cares to receive it. In any event, right, how do you make it affordable? These tax credits make it affordable, right? Because we take these tax credits that you otherwise can't buy anything with, and we sell them to banks. And those banks then give us money or equity. And when they do that, we show up to the table with more equity than debt. And when you have more debt on a property, less debt, we could charge less in rents, right? That's all this is, right? We have the ability, our construction costs are the same, sometimes more because we have prevailing wages. Our architects cost the same amount of money as a market rate developer. Our lawyers don't give us any discounts, right? So at the end of the day, our costs are as more or as much as anyone else. But the way we even the playing field are through these tax credits. It gives us the ability to bring more equity to the table, less debt, and therefore we could charge less on our rents. I have a slideshow for that. This kind of tells you what a tax credit is. Okay, so here, ultimately in this scenario, right, conventional deal, you have a mortgage of, I don't want to get really down into the weeds, but you have a mortgage of $12 million on this conventional deal. But if you go down to the tax credit deal, you have a mortgage of $4.5 million, right? So that, just by virtue of that, I can charge less on my rents and still cover my debt service, right? Still carry the mortgage. In order for doing this, the state says, okay, you have to keep it affordable for 30 or 50 years. And in exchange, we're going to give you these credits that you can sell. And then by selling it, you bring it to the project and you can keep the property affordable. We'll not go into any of that. Okay, so the last question that I always get asked is, how do you actually make money on the project, right? That seems to be the elephant in the room. Under Section 42 of the IRS Code, a developer is allowed to make up to 12 or 15% of most project costs. And something was said in that initial presentation that I didn't really feel was entirely accurate because we are compensated for it, right? We're allowed to make a developer's fee, and that is our compensation for delivering the affordable housing. When we often partner with a non-for-profit like Concern for Independent Living or the East Hampton Housing Authority, we share in that developer's fee. As a developer, you do not get any additional fee for taking on tougher projects. So when you work on projects like Peters or you work on something in Southampton that could take 5 years, the code says you get to 12 to 15%. No one cares that it took you 5 years to do it, right? And no one cares if you never got it done. So essentially, that's how tax credits work. That's Georgia Green.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. So I'm going to ask Michael, before we switch gears a little bit, and I want to leave as much time for questions at the end, but Michael also built outside of Long Island, and I guess, Michael, maybe you could talk a little bit about, first of all, your corporation, but more importantly, you could talk about the difference that you've seen building on Long Island versus other areas.
How you doing, everybody? I'm Michael Rooney Jr. from MDG Design and Construction. Mike Sr., my father. He founded MDG in 1988. We started out in Harlem. We were a big part of the revitalization of Harlem. We worked closely with the city, turning around vacant brownstones, vacant lots, et cetera. And we kind of, we found a niche in affordable housing from there. Since then, we've built or preserved over 18,000 units. And recently we branched out to Long Island, Westchester, Buffalo, New Jersey, and Florida. Being that the bulk of our work is in New York City, I'd say 99% of the 18,000 units are in NYC. We are based on Long Island, and it's an area that I grew up in, and we're highly interested in. And just talking to the state, they have they also recognize the need for affordable housing on Long Island, and the state is basically begging to do projects out here. So we've kind of shifted our focus. We're still doing work in New York City, but we've shifted our focus to do more projects here. So we have a couple property. Well, we have property in Amityville. We have a couple small projects in Port Jefferson. But really, our first major project is where our offices, our existing offices. We've been there for over 15 years, maybe even 20 years, and we've basically put together an assemblage of properties, of houses, retail properties, our office, a warehouse, a parking lot, and it's about time for development. So we're going to move out, and we're looking to do a mixed income, affordable property in Huntington Station. So it's literally just south of the train tracks. The challenges of developing on Long Island is, as we mentioned before, I think it's community engagement. I think affordable housing is pretty much foreign to anybody living out here, and when you mention affordable housing, there's a stigma to it that you're bringing the slums to Long Island. And it's actually the opposite of that. And if you look at Peter's properties or Dave's properties or our properties, our housing, I would say, is actually nicer than most market rate housing. Our projects, we have granite countertops, we have tile floors. They're beautiful apartments. So, and being that they're state funded or city funded, there's a high level of scrutiny to the level of finishes that we're bringing to the properties. Not only that, we mentioned that it's not just for low-income people. Well, it is for low-income people, but it's low-income people is also counts as seniors and young professionals, which is a big population here in Long Island. So on our project in Huntington, that is our main focus, is studios and one-bedrooms, geared towards seniors and young professionals. And that's something we didn't know until we started talking and engaging with the community. Because as we started, meeting with elected officials and community groups and everybody in Huntington, we learned quickly that the biggest thing is the school system. They didn't want to put a heavy burden on the school system. So if we educate people correctly and we're taking into account what the town's needs and wants are and the community's wants are, you can have a very successful project. So on this one, we're looking at about 100 units to 120 units, depending on if we, add another property or two to our site, and we're actively searching for more.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to switch over to Jim Spear, who's going to talk a little bit about the Realtors MLS, and also if you want to, I think that people, we talk about developments that we're doing to build affordable housing, but the Long Island Board of Realtors has been very instrumental in working with us to even help people find homes, because we counsel them, we can educate them, we can get them to understand what they can afford in a mortgage based on the high cost out here with the taxes and all, but then they need to find the unit that they want to home, or the home they want to find. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how realtors can help.
I would love to, thank you. As Peter said, we're a bit different at the MLS. These folks do the developments, the building. We have the efficient method for the realtors to take the listings, put them into a system to make it easy for the realtors to find and then present out to the public. I currently do wear two hats, then we'll get to the affordable housing part. I am the Senior Vice President of Operations at the Multiple Listing Service of Long Island, and I'm also the CEO of the New York MLS, which is a newly formed regional multiple listing service, which was created by merging the Multiple Listing Service of Long Island, which covers Nassau, Suffolk, Brooklyn, and Queens, and the Hudson Gateway Multiple Listing Service, which covers Westchester, White Plains, Orange County, and parts north. Then we're looking to grow from there to make it one market so people don't have to jump all over the place to find properties. We'll become fully operational sometime in 2019, and we'll have about 40,000 subscribers, which will probably make us the 5th or 6th largest multiple listing service in the country. So we're very excited by that. In the discussion of affordable housing, if I could, there's a couple ways that we do help out there, which is, of course, make it so they're easy to find. When they're out there, the people still have to find it, and we have the efficient way to do that. And I'd like to give out some statistics if I could. Number one, what we consider affordable housing. Everybody has a different definition of it, and here's how we figure it, is that we look at and it's different, obviously varies area to area. In Suffolk County, which has a median household income of $92,900, that's 2016 statistics. If we base it on 5% down payment, 30-year conventional mortgage, 5% interest rates, and that the consumer is going to use about 30% of their monthly household income for their housing, we figure that in Suffolk County, $270,000 and under would be considered affordable based on those numbers. Currently in our multiple listing service, there's 760 homes that would fit that bill as far as what's available. About 25% would be condos and co-ops. In Nassau County, with a median household income of $105,850, again 2016 numbers, and the same 5% down, 30-year, blah, 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 we would come to, we would consider $325,000 and under in Nassau County to be affordable housing for people that are looking for those. There's 328 of those currently available, and about a half of them are condos and co-ops. So that's by our definition what we would find. If I could, I'd just like to give everybody some statistics for what's happening in the industry. If I may, everybody likes to know what's going on in the housing market, I believe. What our statistics show is we all know that housing prices have been going up, and that is also what we show. In Nassau, in our market area, which would include Queens, we show that in October of 2018, the median selling price was $465,000, which includes Queens, which is up 5% from last year at this time. Excuse me, I should have worn glasses. When I was younger, I could memorize these things, but it's just not happening nowadays. In Nassau County, the median selling price was $525,000, up 5.2 from last year. In Suffolk County, $389,000, up 8.2 from last year. So what we've been looking at is 12 straight months of year-over-year gains from that. What we are seeing a little bit is, what drives prices up is inventory, tight inventory. We're starting to see slightly more inventory, which if it continues that way, we'll probably see a little bit of a softening in the marketplace and some leveling of prices, I would think. But there's all the great unknowns in the housing market. Will interest rates go up any more than we're expecting? What's going to happen when we all get our first tax bills in April? Nobody knows what that's going to be like. And so those are a few, and what effects will we have when Amazon moves in? Those are some statistics that I may be interested in.
Thank you, Jim. Just interesting, in your median price of home of 500 something in Nassau and 3 something in Suffolk, that's out of the affordability range for
Yes, it is.
most people. So that's why we're here today. That's why it's so critical. But it's interesting that you do have homes that could be affordable if the people had the proper mortgage product and that they have some income that's secure. So it brings me to the point that there's all different levels of affordable housing. So you usually define it by the income, the HUD standard incomes as well. So as we're talking today, you see there are different levels, whether it's a tax credit development, whether it's a limited equity co-op, whether it's a single family home, or it's a median price home here in Nassau, Suffolk County. So that's what I think is the interesting thing about affordable housing. Affordable to whom? Okay. Let me just go to Ian.
Can I add one thing? Because you did ask about, I think, how realtors could help, and I just didn't want to pass that one up. You know, the realtors are such a great resource to point people in the right directions. What their goal is, they live it every day to try and help people live the American dream, find a house to build. They're out there in the communities every day working with agencies such as yourselves and working with local communities. And that's what they do all the time. They'll, if you ask them, and they'll do it on their own, they'll point you to the different programs that exist out there. Many of them are down payment assistance, which is what helps you get into those. We have them on the NLSI consumer site, but make sure you're using the realtor for those to be the resource that they can be.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
No problem. Ian, I'm going to ask you a question because I think one of the reasons, Peter, if I remember correctly, with Moulin Road, prior to your involvement, was the issue of one-bedroom units, and I think the lawsuit, if I remember, was discrimination against families that was brought on that one. I know we heard that people are building for our senior population. Our senior population is a protected class, but when you start talking about the millennial population, they're not a protected class. So if the community wants millennials in it, or wants a building, a high-tech building for millennials, I see some issues with just building it for the millennial population. It would have to be open to all. So why I'm bringing that up is there's a lot of different areas, like even doing a lottery with preferences and things of that nature. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what still are fair housing issues that you see relating to housing that are critical, and maybe you can talk about some of the fair housing issues that continue to replicate, and what work you're trying to do to resolve some of these issues here on Long Island.
If you don't mind, I'm going to take a minute first and talk about my agency a little bit, because I find, and maybe not to this audience, but as I was discussing with one of my coworkers, fair housing is not something you see at the top of the news every night, discussed about exactly what that phrase means. In fact, I co-brand it as fair housing civil rights to make it easier for people so they can put it in an ecosystem. This year, I was honored to become executive director of a 49-year-old fair housing civil rights organization. Our 19-year executive director, whom many people know, Michelle Sant'Antonio, retired, and deservedly so. She did amazing work on Long Island. The mission of our organization actually takes in both. The mission of our organization is the elimination of unlawful housing discrimination and the promotion of safe and affordable housing through education and advocacy. And we take the advocacy very seriously. We're often the unpopular people at the hearing. I was at the hearing for Spionk, and I spoke up in favor of the affordable housing, but as was mentioned here, one of the homeowners said, I don't want Spionk to be the sole place that affordable housing goes, now we put one unit in, and I said to the town board while we were sitting at that particular hearing, I said, yes, it has to go into every single zip code. And to me, here's the way I define it, because this is how I define the American dream. The American dream is the right to live where you want. That means that people should not put blockages in your way based on what you call protected class. Whether it's race, religion, family members, and we've mentioned something, and something really bothered me today. We talked about what millennials' needs are, and that's probably one way of design, is to design housing based on what people's needs are without putting an age restriction on it. But we talked about being willing to build apartments for millennials so they can own together that have 3 or 4 bedrooms. but we aren't building apartments for families with 3 or 4 bedrooms. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is before my time, but I did read the lawsuit. I believe that was one of the issues in Huntington, was that they did not want 3 or 4 bedroom affordable housing because families would live there. And a lot of the things we talk about, and I will say it bluntly, is code words for racism. That's all it is. It's labels that are made up for people because people make up an us and them. And one of the things is families in affordable housing mean them and not us. So that's one issue. Now, I should mention my agency, obviously our core is fair housing because of the need on Long Island, and Peter's organization has done similar. We've expanded, we do a lot of foreclosure prevention. We also have the Only Tenants' Rights line, which also bleeds over into the need for affordable housing, because when you're talking to tenants, they're looking for a place to move also, and they're looking for information on how to get there. And that's actually a big problem, because there's no central place to go on Long Island. I mean, MLS provides information for people who list, but it doesn't provide everything that people need to know in one place. And some of the elected officials were talking about that. We need more of a regional solution. We do the best we can with limited resources to put information together for people, but we can't always do it. Okay. 2 cases that I'm going to bring up that just highlight the kind of work we do, and then we can get into some of the apartment. These were not, one was a renter house case, one was a homeowner case. These got a lot of publicity, and you may not have realized that they were our agency. One was German American Settlement League. And you may not remember that title, but if you saw the articles about the former Nazi summer camp, that was German American Settlement League, because the media loves to print the word Nazi. They just love that word. It sells newspapers. And what happened was, basically, if your grandparents were not from Germany, you couldn't buy there. And this was in Yaphank. And this just happened, this case just settled last year or so. And it blows my mind that this existed. People didn't know about it. One of my coworkers literally lived next door. So this still exists on Long Island. The other one was Village of Mastic Beach. And I've promised Supervisor Ed Romaine that I will say at the time the Village of Mastic Beach was not under the control of the town of Brookhaven at the time. They were a separate village, and they were using their powers as a village to basically push out Hispanic and African American renters on hours' notice. Not full eviction like you have under New York State law, where there has to be a sheriff, there has to be a court hearing, it takes several weeks. No, they were just walking in and basically abusing their powers to condemn properties and throw people out. So that's the kind of problems that we are still dealing with. And these are not old cases. These are cases that are very, very recent. And that's the kind of work we do. Now, obstacles. One thing I did mention is apartment sizes, families. Another one is in real estate, they say location, location, location. Except, and I mentioned this before, when they say location, location, location in real estate, they mean one location, the best location. As we've said here, to me, location, location, location means we should be able to put affordable housing in every location. Because where you live, and it's been mentioned somewhat here, determines what school your children go to, often what food you can buy, what opportunities you have, who they grow up with, often the environmental health of that community. Because as we know, poor and communities with African Americans in it and with Hispanics in it have environmental racism, and more dumping is done there, more polluting is done there. And if we don't give those people choices, if we don't give them economic choices, then they cannot move away from that pollution because they don't have a place to live, especially a place as expensive as Long Island. So these are some of the problems we have. There's a lot more problems now that the HUD is looking to roll back some of the minor work that was done over the last 8 years to actually enforce a law that was passed 50 years ago. But I can get into some more of that later if you like.
Sure, thank you. The only other thing I wanted to say, if you would comment a little bit on it, because we provide technical assistance services to private developers, not-for-profits, and municipalities that are building affordable housing. And one of the things we see a lot is the source of income, you know, about grants, for example, or Section 8. you know, maybe you want to comment on it because both Nassau and Suffolk source of income is also.
Yeah, well, I'll comment on that, and I want to get back to a hot button word that you used of mine, preferences. Source of income, Nassau and Suffolk. It is basically illegal to discriminate in Nassau and Suffolk County by how somebody pays the rent. Money is money is money. So you can't talk about people working or just asking for their W-2s. As long as they can afford it, with, like every other law, there are some minor exceptions and they differ between counties, they have the right to rent that property. Now, right now, the governor actually put up, but it couldn't go anywhere in the last legislature, statewide source of income legislation. Believe it or not, New York, the super liberal state, is surrounded by states with source of income laws, but we do not have it. I am hoping now, especially since it seems the way is being cleared in the legislature, that we will have a statewide source of income, because we have it spotty all over the state. We have it in New York City, we have it in some of the uptown cities. To me, it's an advantage to property owners who own it across multiple jurisdictions, and this is the argument I will constantly make. Regulations to a certain point are an advantage to people in business, because it's clear to them what the business climate and the expectations are. If you own properties in Nassau and Suffolk and you have to obey two different laws, it's more expensive for you. If you have statewide law, it's cheaper. If you own it across Nassau and Suffolk and New York City and you have three different sources of income laws, it's more expensive and more difficult. It's cheaper to have a statewide law. Now, what I would like to have happen, and there's been some rumbling actually in Congress, though I doubt it's going to go anywhere, is just to have it added to the Fair Housing Act. Because often, source of income is another proxy for racism. It falls under what we call disparate impact, which is one of the things that HUD is rumbling about rewriting the rules, even though those Supreme Court decision. Preferences. I will tell municipalities, generally just please stay away from them. There's been so much litigation that preferences cause a problem. If your municipality looks different than the surrounding area, then your preferences are potentially discriminating. I will tell you, when the federal government put in the AFFH regulations, I put in comments that there should be a rebuttable presumption that municipalities have to prove their preferences do not discriminate. I think HUD has done a lot of things that gets in the way. I'm not talking about this HUD, I'm talking about over time, gets in the way of putting affordable housing in and putting affordable housing in every location. So, I'm sorry, you get me started, I rant.
No problem. So I'm going to spend the time now, while the panel thinks about a question, the last question I talked about earlier, one thing could we make a change to improve affordable housing? I'm going to open up the floor for questions, because I think we have a great panel up here. We have a lot of people. We heard their opinions. I'm sure they have a lot more to add. So, but I'm going to open up the questions if anyone has any questions. Yes.
I have a question for Jim. Those two statistics you gave for affordability and the number of inventory.
Yeah.
How does that compare to, what's the total inventory right now on multiple listing? Of all properties?
Well, I'll go by county since I listed by county, if that works for you. There's 9,000 available listings currently in the multiple listing service. 760 of those met that category of affordable housing. In Nassau County, the current inventory is 7,200 available listings, of which 328 met that category.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jim, I think your statistic would be more telling, especially since 5% is really a de minimis down payment. Most people really feel they need 20%, and you know, sometimes it's just to make their payments comfortable. But out of the 700 and 300 units, whatever it is, take out the condos, now take the houses. How many of those houses are really moving condition? Well, when you have 5% down, the bare minimum, you can actually move into something nice, or you're moving into something that really, it's not even livable. I mean, really, what's the condition of those houses?
Right, and as I look at it, it actually varies one to one. I think there's less on the market of the really downtrodden REOs than there used to be, but there would definitely be some of those in there that would be needing work without a doubt.
You wouldn't think the percentage would be high, most of it would need work? You think it's a small percentage?
I don't, I would say that it's a smaller percentage than what that thought would be. Just see, you know, as I eyeballed the ones that came up and the way they were appearing.
I just want to comment on it because on a bigger picture, we do the down payment assistance programs for Nassau, for Babylon, Brookhaven. It's important that people, especially first-time home buyers looking for an affordable home, to get involved in these down payment assistance programs. We run an employer-assisted housing program. Part of that program is tied to, has rehabilitation subsidy in there to help them rehab their home, because I gotta tell you, most of our homes were built right after World War II. So think about the age rate. Where's aging suburban stock out here? So those homes do need rehab, and the whole point is, as we're now creating first-time home buyer programs, we're tying it to a rehab component as well, because there's something that's always needed, and most of our rehab is always associated with code improvements of that nature. So.
That's why you gotta look for those programs.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I've been to two different parts of this day, and we talk about affordable housing from a standpoint of getting into that unit. What we haven't talked about at all tonight is the standpoint of how are we going to keep the unit affordable, from energy, from keeping the tax subsidies in place, keeping the market level to where they can continue to afford the home. And what I find anyway, there are a couple of levels, is yes, they can get there, but they can't stay there because they can't afford the rest of the living costs.
Okay. So I'll talk about the home ownership side, because we have really good experts here that can talk about the rental side in a moment. I'll talk about the rental, but I'd rather let the panel speak. On the home ownership side, when we determine the initial sale price, everything is included in as far as what it costs us to build that house, number one. And number two, what can the family afford, all right, based upon their family size by the HUD guidelines. The difference is we look at not only, and we put in energy efficient equipment, we do energy efficient adjustments and handicap adjustments, whatever's needed. And at the end of the day, this is the total cost of the price. This is what a person at that income should be able to afford with the taxes, the insurance, principal, insurance, taxes, and et cetera. So that variance is the subsidy that we put in. So that person isn't overextended in any fashion. The other point I want to say is that there are a lot of, for first-time home buyers, there's a lot of special mortgage products that are out there. They may waive for certain fees to get them in there. They may provide down payment assistance. There's some banks that provide down payment assistance in addition to the down payment assistance these programs are providing, up to $8,000. So when you couple that, the state has a program, Sunny Mae has a great program. They provide $20,000 for rehab if you go through one of their programs. So the only thing I can say is if someone's looking for a home ownership unit, who's looking for their first-time home buyer, it's very important for them to go to a counseling agency, a HUD certified counseling agency, because they will talk about some of these programs that are out there that will make that home much more affordable. On the rental, it's a little bit different situation. I mean, I'll talk about it, but I'd rather maybe Peter or Dave or whoever works on the tax credit side, how you make it affordable. So Peter.
Sure. So on the rental side, most of about 25% of the overall rental housing in the United States is built with tax credits these days. And almost all of the affordable housing, except for that market rate housing, which has a small percentage of affordable units, is built with tax credits. So with tax credits, you have a built-in affordability levels, as Dave pointed out, and by the way, he did a fantastic job of explaining something that takes up a room this size of documents in a matter of minutes, David. So thank you very much for that explanation of tax credits. But with tax credits, and that's affordable to households at or below 60% of the area median income. And by the way, there is a little bit of good news that came out of the recent tax code change, which is that there is something now called income averaging, which allows us to go a little bit over the 60% AMI, which is nice because it allows for not just one income tranche and that's it. It allows us to balance out so we can do a little bit below 60% and now up to 80%. So as long as it's balanced out on the other side, and it averages 60% area median income, we have that flexibility, which gives our ability to reach different income levels, which is really nice. But the way that is structured, and to answer the question about how do we know that this is going to be there for the long term, is that there are regulatory agreements that go along with this. And they are in place typically nowadays for a minimum of 50 years. And if that's not enough from the funding sources, there are also on Long Island towns are now requiring through covenants restrictions through covenants that the affordability also remain in place for a significant amount of time, if not in perpetuity, which creates other issues with the lenders, but I won't get into that right now.
So Peter, 1 second, Dick. So Peter, in addition to that, so you may see developments, rental developments that are not tax credits, but have some form of subsidy, and they usually define what income population we have to serve. But there are also ones that are density driven now, because under the state law, if they got a density increase, they have to set aside, if they're building 5 or more units, 10% of those units is affordable. They are monitored by third parties, where Long Island Housing Partnership monitors hundreds of these units. Different than New York City. New York City, if you got in a tax subsidized unit, you stay there for life. Here, we, every year, determine whether the person's income is still eligible, and there's certain requirements to go up a little bit, or or if the next unit becomes available, they have to make that affordable. There's ways now out here, if it's density driven, the municipality requires a third party to review it to make sure they're in compliance. So, there is oversight, and that's the good thing out here, more so than ever. And whether it's with the funding source that has the oversight, Peter, you mentioned the municipality, absolutely. The municipality requires it, that's why we're involved in a lot of these deals. But there is oversight. So whether it's rental, home ownership, they remain affordable. I will say in the downturning foreclosure crisis, there was less than 0.23% of the people that came in were counseled appropriately or were in affordable housing development. And those individuals, most of them was because of no fault of them, because they lost their job or they had a health issue. So we monitor those stats very closely. So I'll stop there, but Dick, you wanted to say something as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, can you hear me? I wanted to say that when we talk about affordability, we have to really deal with the fact that even the definition we heard earlier from Jim is not affordable. Typically, for example, if you buy a home, the price of the home should not be more than 3 times your gross income. So what was the affordability for Nassau County? $305,000, so, which means you would have to earn about $100,000 a year to afford that home. Something like 45% of Long Islanders are paying more than 30% of their income for their home costs. And when you get into rentals, it's like 56%. And so when we did our study, we began to look at the folks who are earning under 50% of area median. And now you're talking about people earning $60,000 a year. $60,000, which in other parts of the country would be considered comfortably middle class, that's almost poverty here. And so one of the things I want to put on the table is when we talk about affordability, don't talk about 100,000. I mean, they're struggling. But what about, there's something like 123,000 households in Suffolk County alone that are earning under 50% of the median income. Where do they go? One of the things we found was that at any typical day in Suffolk, there are 500 homeless households. It costs Suffolk County $19 million a year to shelter the homeless. Almost half of the homeless households on any given day have a source of income. They're homeless because they've been forced out of a housing situation they can't afford. So, we can't just keep talking about the upper echelon of the people who need affordable housing, 80%, 120% of area median. We've got hundreds of thousands of households below 50% of that area. Where do they go? And again, if they go into shelters in Suffolk County, that's $19 million a year. Somebody said to us when we did our press conference, that's a lot of housing you could build for $19 million. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. That's what I said before, affordable to whom we have to look at.
That was the title of our 2007 report.
Oh, yeah.
Affordable for
Oh,
whom.
really? Yes, I'm sorry, you've been patient.
Thank you, and I'm from Sunny Bay, thank you for the plug.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's a good program that answers some of the questions that were asked in terms of what the state can help you with, low income, low to moderate income, mortgages and down payment loan assistance. But I have a question, and this is kind of like looking at the World's Fair of affordable housing 40 years from now. Are there new models, paradigm shift in the way houses are formed? Like I noticed there are some municipalities here, if you had your druthers, a wish list, and what you could see 40 years from now, what would you see in terms of housing opportunities? Like here, single family homes, there's multiple family homes now, we have transportation hubs, but in terms of, for the timeline of millenniums to seniors, having, like when my dad was in assisted living, he couldn't afford it, so he had a roommate, and that was fine in assisted living. Are there opportunities that are not being considered because the zoning by municipalities, because it's just, this is Long Island and this is how it's been done, are there models out there in terms that you can, a wish list of what you can see, you know, in terms of even dormitory type living? And I'm hearing about this now, possibly in the hub, that you'll have, and they're doing in Japan, and they're doing in Europe. What, are there things being talked about other than every affordable housing I've heard? It's the same type of housing. There's apartments, there's rents, there's this, but there's got to be other models out there that will help in terms of the property taxes, of elevating that. I realize it's not an easy answer, but is there a wish list out there?
No. Oh. Sure, there is. You know, but along with the wish list, you know, is the fact that what we wish for, you know, what we're asking for right now is at, you know, level 5 degree difficulty when getting our approvals. If we get what we would really like, which is greater density, right? You know, longer pilots, smaller units as they're doing now in the city. Those are the kinds of things that we'll probably see more of as we move into the future. But getting those approved today, I think is, you know, it's difficult enough as it is to get what we're asking for approved. Going to that next dimension, I think, right now I'm not sure we're ready for that, but I think that's where the future is.
So I'll comment a little, Peter, but I think you're the one that's going to move it forward because you took that risk with the limited equity co-op. But I had 3 meetings alone in the last couple of weeks on that dormitory type style housing where you have a locked bedroom, a locked bedroom and bathroom, and you share, or you have a locked refrigerator each, and then you share everything else, the common space. So it's becoming an issue that I think developers have looked at. You know, as Peter said, very difficult to move it forward, I think, on Long Island because it's another education and training piece. Doesn't mean we shouldn't. We should keep pushing ahead, all right? The second thing I see is accessory apartments being added to people's homes. All right? We had all these McMansions being built. Why can't we put an accessory apartment in? Legalize it, make sure it's a safe and standard place for a person to live. We built with accessory apartments, and it also helped the homeowner be able to afford their home and their mortgage. So I think that's critical. And I will say the last thing that we are now putting in place that I like to see development. Dave, I don't know if you have a comment.
Yeah, just very, hi Michelle. Michelle was a former state assemblywoman. We actually worked together on Spinney Hill Homes. I'll never forget a call that you and I had, actually your drive back from Albany, ensuring that the project would move forward, and I appreciate all of your support when you were there. And now it's Sunny Bay. So just very quickly, I over the summer did a graduate program, and learning from people around the country. They, in Brazil, I was talking to a developer, and they're doing 50,000 units, and it's micro units, and they're small, but there is stuff that's out there that we just haven't gotten to here. So we are looking and learning and trying to see other lessons learned. We're also looking at modular housing. Katie and I are looking into it, and it's a different way to build, but something that helps expedite a project. It's less, a lot of the communities, the impact that they have. If you could have construction rather over 18 months, over 11 months, that's certainly a benefit to the local community. So anyway.
And the last thing I think, thank you, Dave, is the land trust model. To be quite honest with you, if we started it 30 years ago, I know you put the 40-year period, but maybe we should push that out to a 100-year period, but in 30 years, we would have thousands of units that we would own in perpetuity, and we'd always own the land, and always continue to make that affordable. And I know people sometimes talk down different models, but in reality, a lot of public subsidy goes into building an affordable home, and you want to keep that affordable. And affordable goes back to whom, all right? The more you let it go out of that affordable pool, the more expensive that home comes back at. So in order to protect the taxpayers' dollars and in order to keep the economy strong, we need these affordable homes here across all different levels of income. So thank you for bringing it up. Yes.
Elaborate something. Has there been anything in New York, California has passed legislation recently, I think 2017, regarding the accessory dwelling unit, where there's a second dwelling unit on a property, rather than the accessory apartment itself, they would build a second, much smaller model of a house or living unit on the property, and they were restricted to a third acre, quarter acre. It couldn't do it on a really small lot, but they were allowed to do it on a third acre. And then they also, this is where the granny pods come into place, where people would take these prefabricated granny pods and stick them on the property, and that made it a unit for the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, whatever. Because it was very interesting to me, but I haven't seen any movement in New York on that, and I think it's something kind of sketched out.
Well, I think on Long Island we have infrastructure issues and health department issues. I think that's what it becomes. Our accessory apartments have to stay under a certain square footage, all right? So when you add additional structure to it, that's when the health department gets involved. So there have to be changes or improved infrastructure, sewer systems that need to be put in place, especially since we're in most of Suffolk County, we're over sole source aquifer area. So.
The town of Southampton is really working on trying to figure out a way to make that work.
I read some rumblings on that, yes.
All right, if there's no more questions, I'm just going to ask very quickly, in 60 seconds or less, one thing that you'd like to see from the panel, each panel member, what you think that we could do to improve the ability to create more affordable housing here on Long Island. So I'm going to start with Tracy, if you want to.
Sure. I think it would help if we stop making up terms for affordable housing. There's workforce, now there's some other word.
Next generation.
What is it? Attainable. All of that is nonsense. And all it does is just further divide and further define affordable housing as something less desirable. So if everybody would just stop doing that and making up names and just call affordable housing and talk about the affordable for whom, instead of just, oh no, I'm not building affordable housing, I'm building attainable housing, I think that that's nonsense. And I think we can continue to move further by having tough conversations and not making up new definitions.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I had a news reporter call me about 14 years ago saying, could you tell me what the difference is between affordable housing, workforce housing, and next generation? And when I said, there is no formal definition, what are you talking about? And he goes, no, there has to be. I go, there is no definition. These are made-up terms that people think, it's a term of the moment, we call it in affordable
Can I help for one second? I've questioned recently whether the phrase workforce housing violates the human rights laws in Nassau, Suffolk County, because it defines the method of income by saying it's workforce housing.
Right.
And that's something I want to look at some point.
Yes, and I'll help you.
Yeah. So, anyway, thank you. Dick, do you have a?
By the way, next generation housing is racist, because it means
that
the person who's going to get the housing has to be of my genetic makeup. So stay away from that one. So one of the things we found in our report on supportive housing was that the governor had set aside, the state set aside $2.5 billion for 6,000 units, 7,000 units, sorry. 6,000 of the units went to New York City, and the remaining 1,000 went to a legal category I had never heard of called rest of state. I thought it was a figure of speech. It's actually a legal category, meaning the rest of New York State outside of New York City. So my wish list would be that we have sufficient funding, because the housing, real affordable housing, particularly for low-income people, cannot be built without government subsidies, and that those subsidies be spread out to the rest of the state as well as New York City.
Great point. Thank you. Ian?
Mine, and I know it's self-reflective, is that we go back to the Obama era affirmatively furthering fair housing regulations, which actually go back to the 1968 law where it's required, because I believe those regulations give municipalities cover in order to say, we're getting these millions of dollars a year, we have to do that. I'm sorry you don't like it, but this is what we are required to do, or we lose this money. Because I'll hammer on again and again, I believe we can use laws to not only do the right thing, but also to provide cover to people to do the right thing, or sometimes force them to do the right thing.
Good point. Thank you. Peter?
Yes.
The state of New York, I agree, I'd love to see more money coming from the state, but the fact is that the vast majority of the funds that go to build affordable housing here on Long Island come from the state. And in return, the state expects the localities to contribute something. And from our standpoint, that something is a payment in lieu of taxes, which market rate projects are asking for as well now. You know, you're not seeing projects without them. And unfortunately, it is pilot, you know, is that even a worse word than affordable housing. And what I would like to see is some form of, you know, uniformity on how pilots are administered, particularly as it deals with affordable housing, similar to what the methods that are used in New York City, where there's a predefined, you know, if you build X amount of affordable housing, you know, high percentage of affordable housing in a project, you're entitled to a pilot. Every single project that we do, you know, it's not enough that we have to go through the whole land use process, building department, years and years and years and years of that. We also have to then obtain tax relief for these projects, and typically for a minimum of 15 years. And every jurisdiction that administers, every IDA, or there are some other methods of getting, has a different methodology of administering them. So what I would like to see is some kind of uniformity. I think that would really help the process and prevent us from, you know, going way down that path only to find out, sorry folks, it's not available, you know, and stop. So that's it. Thank you.
Point. And what Peter's saying is he wants an as a right. If he meets X, Y, and Z defined by the policy, then I automatically get the pilot or the without going any further or arguing or whatever, because that's a real critical issue. I mean, there's a lot of money spent getting down to that point to begin with. So, thank you, Peter. Jim?
Mine will be quick. In favor of the high-density housing around the transportation hubs, because not only do I think that helps with the affordable housing there, but with all those people moving in, it takes away part of the pressure on the existing stock of homes, so there won't be that pressure on the existing inventory.
Thank you, Jim.
My comment is the same as Peter's. Can't do it without a pilot.
I wrote down rezoning for larger scale development projects. That's one of the biggest things that we need as developers is scale, because that's what makes affordable housing feasible. And with that comes infrastructure, some more support from towns to build sewers and tie into sewers. That also supports that scale. And lastly, more support from towns by making public land available for RFPs to build affordable housing. I drive around Long Island all the time and I see wasted, vacant city land that's underutilized.
Thank you, Michael. I want to thank the panel here because you know, when I first reviewed it, I obviously looked at all your backgrounds, et cetera, and tried to put it together. And I think it was really worthwhile for the experience of sitting at this table here to be able to talk about their experiences, talk about what they see going forward, talk about what they wish to make life a little bit easier for people involved in affordable housing. And I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you today, so I appreciate it. And